In my last video discussing the racist propaganda I was taught from this history book in my conservative Christian school, I mentioned this section they had about Robert E. Lee. In the 14th chapter, under the subsection Heroes of the Civil War, the following is said about Robert E. Lee. The thought of war greatly troubled Robert E. Lee because he loved the United States. Lee hated slavery and had even set his own slaves free. Everything you just heard was incredibly misleading because while it is true that Robert E. Lee did free his slaves, he didn't do it because he wanted to. He did it because he was forced to. Robert E. Lee owned a few dozen slaves under his own name, but the enslaved people they're referencing are the 187 human beings he inherited from his father-in-law, George Custis. When George Custis died in 1857, his will stated that his human property was to be left to his son-in-law, Robert E. Lee, under the condition that Robert E. Lee would set them free 5 years after he inherited them. Now, you might be surprised to hear this, but Robert E. Lee wasn't too thrilled about the whole 5-year limit on all this free labor, so he went to the Virginia state courts 2 times to get an indefinite extension on his ownership, once in 1858, another time in 1862. He lost both cases. I find the 1862 date especially interesting because that is during the American Civil War. Virginia had broken away from the Union and was a Confederate state. Imagine loving slavery so much that you need a Confederate state judge to say, bro, what do you want me to do? Like, I'm looking at the will and it's very clear. The law is the law. You have to let them go. It's hard to imagine being a bigger villain than that. And of course, he was a brutal, sadistic slave owner as well. Read up some time on the account of Wesley Norris, one of the individuals who Robert E. Lee owned, to find out how great and kind, loving a man he was. So Robert E. Lee freed his slaves in 1862 because he had no choice, but my Christian school didn't mention anything about that. And quite honestly, yours probably didn't either, because we'd rather hold on to this fiction that Lee was some noble man who was forced to fight for an unjust cause. And the fact that he's held in such high regard is a true national disgrace.